Well, greetings, Word family. It's that time again. Welcome to another installment of There's a Word for That. The weekly word presentation is part of the Hymns with Phil Carter Fellowship. I'm Pastor Cynthia Turner Wood. I want to thank you for joining us again. Let's go ahead and get to work. Today's word is astounded. Astounded, as found in Mark chapter 6, verses 51b and 52. He says, "Then they got into the boat with them, and the wind ceased. And they were utterly astounded, for they did not understand about the loaves, but their hearts were hardened." I've been working with this text for some time. I'm talking about the disciples who were utterly astounded, for they didn't understand about the loaves. Reading just that verse, it would not be so surprising because you'd think that it would be talking about feeding the 5,000, which it is, with 5 loaves and 2 fish. And that's really something to be utterly astounded about. That would leave me pretty astounded. I don't know about you. After all, it is a miracle, and being utterly astounded would be a normal response. But this verse, though it is about the fish and the loaves, comes after a second miracle. It really comes after Jesus has walked on the water. Would you be surprised if I told you that oftentimes it takes a crisis to show you where your real priorities are and to show you what you really believe? I think that's what was happening here. Come aboard this boat with me. And the group of sweaty, weary, worn out disciples who had just finished teaching and with Jesus, having Jesus teach and them feed the 5,000 folks. These disciples came with Jesus to what was supposed to be a deserted place so that they could have some rest. They were tired. They had been working hard, but they got sideswiped by these 5,000 folks who they didn't have enough of Jesus, followed Jesus to that deserted place too. And so as soon as they got off the boat and the teaching happened and all of that, the disciples wanted to send them away. Jesus said, "No, you feed them." And then they came up with the 5 fish, they 2 loaves, they brought it to Jesus. Jesus multiplied it and they did the feeding. And after everything was all cleaned up, Jesus sent the disciples ahead of him to Bethsaida, sent them across the Sea of Galilee. And then he went up the mountain to pray. But later that night, while they were out there on the sea, a storm hit, and they were straining against the oars and striving against adverse winds. Did Jesus know that a storm was going to come up that night? Probably, perhaps. His divinity would suggest that, yeah, he probably did. But I'll let other people debate that. That's not even our issue today. What I want to focus on is this. You never really know when you're going to find yourself in a storm, hitting up against adverse winds. In fact, I heard my husband, Reverend Dr. Jesse Wood, preach this text recently. He came at it from another angle, but I thought he made a great point. He said, you can be doing all the right things for all the right reasons and still find yourself in a storm. Anybody know what I'm talking about? Still find yourself striving against adverse winds and straining at the oars. But don't fret, because here's the good news of that. The really good news is that though they were not with Jesus, Jesus was still with them. Although they were on the sea and Jesus was on the land, the text says, while he was up there praying, he saw them striving against the wind and straining at the oars. And somebody ought to shout about that right there. I shouldn't even have to go any further, that no matter where you are never so far that Jesus does not have his mind on you. Better still, never so far away that Jesus does not even see you. Wherever you are, there he was on the land, up the mountain praying, and there they were on the sea over there, and Jesus saw them, the text says. He saw them straining against the wind and striving against the oars. And even though he was over there and they were over here, he was able to see them. I love that about this text, and I need someone today to know that no matter where you are, he never loses sight of you. Better still, he will come and rescue you where you are. He's never not concerned about your whereabouts, and I praise God for that. But check this out. Don't miss the timing of the text, because it was evening when the storm came up and they were straining against the oars. But it was not until morning that Jesus finally showed up. You know what that's like, don't you? Feeling like you are being tossed like salad on the waters, rowing ferociously against adverse wind, being thrown hither and yon and to and fro from this thing to that thing. And everywhere you turn, there's some adverse wind coming your way. And Jesus takes his sweet time before coming to the rescue. You can't miss the significance of that in a gospel that is full of immediatelys. Mark's gospel, that's where we are, Mark chapter 6. Mark's gospel has the word immediately 42 times in that gospel, but not right here. Here they are straining against the wind and striving against the oars, and Jesus does not come all night long. This happened in the evening, and Jesus does not come until the morning. And I would purport to you that sometimes, somebody say sometimes. Sometimes Jesus does not respond in the immediately because he knows that what's a storm to us is really mere child's play to him. Could it be, perhaps, that he knows that the storm's power is no match for the strength of their power when their power has his backing with it? Could it be that even from afar, he's keeping enough of watch on them to keep the storm in check, so that though they may be tossed to and fro, it will not overcome them. They will not tip over. The boat will not take on too much water because Jesus still has his eyes on them. I love this song by Nicole C. Mullen. It's one of my favorite songs. I had it sung at my ordination service. She's asked the question, who told the sun where to stand in the morning? And who told the ocean, you can only come this far? And who showed the moon where to hide till evening? Whose words alone can catch a falling star? This very same God that spins things in orbit runs to the weary, the worn, and the weak. And the same gentle hands that hold me when I'm broken, they conquer death to bring me victory. That's really what I'm trying to put out as a point here this morning and this afternoon, is that, you know what? It really doesn't matter how strong the storm is. What really matters is that our God has power over the storm. We don't have to worry so much about it, because in due season, at the appointed time, when morning comes, Jesus will take care of it. Jesus knows his power to keep the storm in check. And I want somebody to know today that even though you are struggling in the storm and it seems like it's taken too long and the adverse winds are blowing and you are straining against the oars, if Jesus has not yet come to the rescue, it's because he knows the storm, bad as it may be, will not overtake you. It does not have the power to do that, because the power of the storm is not in the storm. The power of the storm is in the hands of Jesus to say, peace, be still at the appointed time. So he stays up the mountain praying because he needs prayer. He's been teaching himself. He's been putting out. He's been doing miracles, working things. He raised up a dead little girl off of her deathbed. He gave blinded eyes sight and unstopped deaf ears. He had been doing some miracles up to this point. He needed that time. So while they wrestled all night, Jesus is praying. This truly is a weeping may endure for the night, but joy comes in the morning story. So that when the morning came, he came towards them walking on the sea. His very appearance lets us know that whatever it takes to get us out of trouble, he'll defy gravity, he'll control time, he'll navigate space. Whatever it takes to get to us, to get us through the storm, he will do it. That's why we can never just look at the circumstances from an earthly circumstantial point point of view, because this is Jesus, who is fully human and fully divine with all of the qualities of humanity, but thankfully also all of the attributes of God. His eminence is unstoppable. His grace is undepletable. His mercy is everlasting. There's no lack of or shortage of supply. His power and ability never seem to run out. The clock could not delay him. Gravity could not weigh him down. The sea could not swallow him. The wind could not hold him back. He's Jesus, and he will come to the rescue. So that whatever you are straining against, you need to know that the same Jesus that came to them that morning walking on the water is the same Jesus that can come to you despite whatever situation is confronting you. He comes into the boat with them. Oh, and when he comes in the boat with them, the winds cease. Because when he's far from us, or whether he's near us, the storm stands no chance. It cannot overtake us. But let me hasten on, because that's not even really where I want to put a pin this morning. Where I want to put a pin is in this next part, because the more relevant part to me is their reaction after the storm, after this miracle of him walking on the water and stilling the storm and coming to them and defying gravity and all of that. Listen to their reaction, because while he's away praying and sees their struggle throughout the night and comes to them in the morning, walking on the water to rescue them, they thought he was a ghost and cried out, but he spoke to them and said, "Don't be afraid." And then he got in the boat, and the text says this is the part right here. They were utterly astounded, for they did not understand about the loaves, and their hearts were hardened. The loaves was yesterday's thing. What about today? Tarry with me, if you will, here for a moment, because you would think that they would be astounded by this last miracle, amazed in the fact that they were delivered from their storm or through the storm, caught up in the fact that once again Jesus has come to the rescue, astonished over the fact that he turned a stormy sea into a sidewalk to get to where they are, that he located them though it was far away, and all of that, name all of that stuff. You would think that it would say, and they were astounded that Jesus located them, as if he had a divine GPS system and found them and climbed in the boat. They were astounded that the waters ceased. They were astounded that the waves held him up. They were astounded. No. They were stuck somewhere back in the last miracle, because they did not understand about the loaves, but their hearts were hardened. That's what the text says. There it is. I think that's the key piece right there. Their hearts were hardened. I would purport to you that the reason, perhaps, that they struggled all night in the storm, and the reason for their confusion over the loaves, the reason that they had to go through all of that adversity, was because their hearts were hardened. You got to be careful about letting a hardened heart lead you. I think they were still mad about having to serve the 5,000, feed the 5,000, when they really thought that they were going to have some time to rest. I think they were mad about still having their plans unexpectedly change. Here they were. They came to Jesus on his invitation for some rest, and they had to do all that work. But here's the thing. Maybe they were forced to strive against the wind because they needed to work off all of that hard-heartedness that was going on. Because instead of being utterly astounded about the loaves and bearing a hard heart, they should have been glad. They should have been rejoicing. They should have been celebrating over how God used them to play a part in doing the miraculous. I just came by to tell you, church, to be prepared, because sometimes life will take on some unexpected twists and turns and go along paths you never expected. But you can't let that harden your heart. Don't let it get to you to the place where you miss the blessing that awaits you today because you're stuck looking at the thing that beset you on yesterday. And sometimes it takes a crisis to clarify your priorities, to show what you really believe. You'll never get far trying to do the Lord's work when your heart is hard, because you can't carry a hard heart into a world that is dying and is looking for salvation. Perhaps Jesus said, ain't no need in carrying that funky attitude over to Bethsaida. I already got enough funky attitude people over there. I don't need to take you along. So we're going to strive here against adverse winds tonight. We're going to work this thing out tonight before you get over there. You still got confusion about the loaves and you're still astounded over all that. We're going to work this out tonight before we get to where we're going, because I got new miracles I need to do, new mercies that are awaiting, more grace that needs to be expended. And I can't have you the way that you are until you get right. No need in spreading that disbelief and doubt and add to the confusion already in the land. I need some folk who know who I am and who know what I can do. But here's another thing. The fact that their hearts were hardened is evidence that miracles alone cannot satisfy us. Miracles alone cannot sustain you. For when your faith is dependent on miracles, you will always have a "what have you done for me lately" mentality. You'll always be looking for the next razzle-dazzle epiphany. Nope, our faith must be based on relationship. We need to have relationship with the Lord and trust in the one who is able to keep us from falling and is able to present us faultless before his glorious throne with exceeding great joy. It's the relationship that will refocus your astonishment from what he's done to who he is, so that when we hit up on the storm and the adverse winds and we are straining against the oars, we won't retreat. Instead, we'll go deeper in declaring that we've come this far by faith, leaning on the Lord, trusting in his holy word, and he has never failed us yet. Can't turn around because he has never failed us yet. I don't know for sure what their issue with the loaves was, but I do know that they missed out on today's miracle, on the celebration and the rejoicing and the wonder-working power of today's miracle, because they were hard-hearted, hung up, and distracted by yesterday not going the way they thought. And worse still, they missed out on enjoying the very presence of Jesus because they did not understand about the loaves. And the text says their hearts were hardened. What was it that they didn't understand? Number one, I think they didn't understand that feeding was that ministry, that feeding was not the only thing that ministry was about. Meeting spiritual needs was not all that there was to it. I've said it before and I'll say it again. True spirituality is to know that we all have needs, and all of those needs are not necessarily spiritual. In life, while humanity cannot live by bread alone, they do need some bread. This was an act of resistance, this feeding Jesus did against the powers who were doubting who he was, who were thinking he wasn't the divine one, the Messiah, the anointed one, the Christ. This was an act of resistance against the powers who only want to focus on spiritual stuff. Oh, we just gonna give you thoughts and prayers. I'm sorry your child was gunned down, but we can't change the lies. But here, have some thoughts and prayers. This was an act of resistance against those who are legalists, whose morals and ethics bear no weight because they don't take into account the full picture, that all they want to do is perpetuate some spiritual laws without giving heed or notice to the physical and the practical, like folks who claim to be pro-life, but because of their short-sightedness really only amount to being pro-birth, using Joan Chittister's terminology. If you won't support universal access to care, to child care, to health care, to school lunches, to education, then you're not pro-life. You're just pro-birth. And if you don't care about a mother's health, when the mortality rate, the maternal mortality rate among Black women is higher than it is in some industrialized countries, you don't care about pro-life. You are just pro-birth. You don't care about the school to prison pipeline. You won't speak up about the immoral behaviors that won't support men be equally held responsible for pregnancy. That's just being pro-birth when you are not concerned about life. But Jesus said, I came that you might have life and have that life more abundantly. But here's the second thing they did not understand about the loaves was that sometimes in life and in ministry, stuff happens that you cannot predict or prepare for, but to which you must always be prepared to pivot and to respond to. Distractions will come and detractors will rise up and the unexpected will happen. All of that to pull us off plan. But know too that loaves will happen. With Jesus, that's always the unexpected. He is able to handle that. Miracles do occur. Plans change and moments shift, all because Jesus has the power to work within those situations where the folks are willing to work with him. 5,000 people got fed that day because even though the disciples were tired and hungry and hangry and depleted and sweaty and funky and all of that, they trusted Jesus enough to press through and finish the assignment. And so must we, my sisters and brothers, keep going when we don't feel like it. I know that's not a popular message today because I know about self-care and I know about the need to rest. And that's in the text too. Jesus went off and prayed. He sent the disciples away to rest. He even invited them to rest. But there's also evidence that sometimes you got to push through, because here's the thing. The text shows that Jesus did not leave them in a place of and leave them alone in a place, and Jesus will never leave us in a place of scarcity and lack. Not at all. They had more than what was required in the end, and more than enough so that when they got on the boat, they had enough fish sandwiches to feed them all across the lake and then some. But finally, here's what they did not understand about the loaves, that they were utterly astounded about the loaves, is that he had just preached a liberating gospel that drew enormous crowds. And that's what a liberating gospel will do. It'll draw some folks. He just fed 5,000, just walked on the water, just stilled a storm, not to mention the other miracles they watched him perform. But they did not understand about the loaves. Those loaves represented abundance, represented the kind of abundance that the kingdom represents. Jesus is an all-sufficient God. I came that you might have life and have it more abundantly, have it to the full. Greed and lack and insufficiency and shortchanging have no place in the plan of God. That's why those 12 baskets were left, to show that in the kingdom, you don't have to worry about running out, because there's never a shortfall, only lavish abundance. The world looks upon some folks and says you can only have this much, but the kingdom is not limited by any of that. In fact, we serve a God who comes into the world to show the world that he is not limited by the world's restrictions. God's very crossing over from eternity into time, from supernatural into natural, from kairos into chronos, is an expression of God's ability to transcend, transform, but never to conform. He exerts power of the natural world to meet the needs of the human world without yielding to the best part of God's self to any limitations that anybody might place on him. I know that's a mouthful. You'll have to rewind and play that later. I'm just about all out of time, because all I really came to tell you this morning, church, is that when things don't go according to plan, ask yourself whether you are stuck misunderstanding the loaves, whether you are utterly astounded and become hard-hearted because you didn't understand what Jesus was doing. Because in order for you to move forward, it's imperative that you get your understanding of the loaves right. Well, my beloved, I came and I'm glad that you tuned in today. I hope that you are too. This is Pastor Cynthia Turner Wood, and I'll see you next week for another installment of There's a Word for That. You can reach me at a word for that, the number 4, that, a word, the number 4, that, at dayspringthrive.org or at gmail.com. I look forward to seeing you the next time. I look forward to hearing from you in the meantime. Until then, know that whatever the issue is, there really is a word for that. For the grass withers and the flower fades, but the word of God lasts forever. Thank you for listening. Have a great week.